He gave his son his name, his gang, and his world. For Andrew Bender II, that was just life in Compton. You carried what you knew and passed it down. His son grew up inside the same set, surrounded by the same people, living by the same rules. But street alliances don't last forever, and when old friendships turn into something far more dangerous, the consequences don't discriminate. Before it was all over, both men had been killed, and both by the same people they once called family. Andrew Gregory Lee Bender III was born and raised in Compton, a city where kids often grow up fast and learn hard lessons early. But when Andrew was young, his focus wasn't on the streets, it was on sports. By the time he was 5 years old, he was already competing, and once football entered his life, it became his whole world. The game wasn't just something he enjoyed, it was something he lived for. His passion ran so deep that there were times he played in 2 different football leagues at the same time, determined to sharpen his skills any way he could. Like a lot of talented young athletes, Andrew dreamed of making it to the professional level. His family believed in that dream too. Wanting to give him every possible opportunity, they relocated so he could attend Long Beach Poly, a school known across California for producing elite football talent. By 2012, Andrew had earned a spot on the junior varsity squad as a fullback, and everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then life threw him a devastating curveball. During his senior year in 2013, Andrew developed serious back problems. Just like that, the sport he had dedicated most of his life to was taken away from him. The football career he had spent years chasing suddenly came to a halt. Ironically, football had also been one of the reasons his family left Compton in the first place. Back when Andrew was a sophomore, his mother, Tiffany Moore, moved the family because her son desperately wanted to escape the violence surrounding him. According to Tiffany, simply getting off the bus after football practice often meant dealing with gang members looking to harass him. It became clear that a change of environment was necessary. After graduating in 2014, Andrew enrolled at Long Beach City College. Like many young adults trying to balance responsibilities, though, school eventually had to take a back seat. Bills needed to be paid, and Andrew needed steady income. He found work as a security guard and quickly became the type of young man his family could depend on. The paycheck helped him support his 2 younger sisters, but he was also preparing for an even bigger responsibility. His girlfriend, Sienna Stevens, was pregnant, and the couple was getting ready to welcome a child into the world. Their relationship had a story that sounded almost too perfect to be real. The 2 first met in high school when they were sophomores. At the time, Sienna was dating someone else, but Andrew confidently told her that one day she would be his girlfriend and they would build a family together. What sounded like a bold prediction eventually became reality. They grew close, started dating, and stayed together through the years that followed. While Andrew was building a future, there was another side of his life pulling him in a different direction. Gang culture had always been close to home. His father, Andrew Bender II, was a respected member of the neighborhood Compton Crips and was known on the streets as Lil Bubs. Growing up around that environment made it difficult to avoid. Eventually, Andrew followed the same path, joining the neighborhood Compton Crips and adopting the nickname Bubs, carrying on the name his father had established years earlier. Years earlier, the neighborhood Compton Crips had close ties with the Atlantic Drive, Kelly Park, and Southside Compton Crips. The bond ran deep. Families knew one another, friendships went back decades, and members often stood shoulder to shoulder against shared enemies. For a long time, those relationships helped keep the peace between the sets. But in the streets, alliances rarely last forever. So when cracks began to form, the fallout was inevitable. And for the Bender family, the consequences would be devastating. January 27, 2016 started off like any other morning in Compton. Around 8:51 a.m., Andrew Bender and a man named Cooper were walking down Cedar Street on their way to a nearby market. To the people passing by, it probably looked like nothing more than two friends making a quick trip to the store. But underneath the surface, there were tensions that had been brewing for years. Bender was a member of the neighborhood Compton Crips, while Cooper was known to associate closely with the gang. As they made their way down the street, they came across a man named Cornell Dunlap standing outside his grandmother's house. Coincidentally, his grandmother lived just a house away from the parents of Sandy Holyfield, the wife of the man who would later become central to the investigation. At that moment, however, none of that seemed important. What happened next was a familiar street encounter that could turn dangerous in an instant. Bender and Cooper approached Dunlap and asked where he was from. Dunlap responded that he was from Nutty Block. The two men answered by identifying themselves as being from neighborhood before continuing on their way. The encounter was brief, but in neighborhoods where gang politics run deep, even a short conversation can carry weight. A few minutes later, at approximately 8:57 a.m., Dunlap left his grandmother's home in a gold Dodge Avenger. For reasons that weren't immediately clear, he pulled over shortly after driving away. At nearly the same moment, Bender and Cooper were making their return trip from the market. Then everything changed. Without warning, a gunman appeared from behind and opened fire. Shot after shot rang out across Cedar Street. By the time the shooting stopped, Bender had been struck 10 times. Cooper reacted purely on instinct and ran for his life. As he fled, he glanced back and saw a chilling scene unfold behind him. According to his later testimony, the shooter stood over Bender's body before taking off down the street. Cooper watched as the gunman ran toward a Dodge Avenger parked nearby. Moments later, he called 911. Investigators would later review surveillance footage from the area. The video captured a man sprinting down Cedar Street at approximately 8:58 that morning. During the trial, Dunlap identified the runner as Anthony King. According to Dunlap, he had actually picked King up after King flagged him down and requested a ride to a grocery store. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Anthony King, known on the streets as AWOL, was allegedly a member of the Atlantic Drive Compton Crips. The Atlantic Drive gang and the neighborhood Compton Crips had a long-standing rivalry, making the connection impossible to ignore. According to testimony, Dunlap eventually drove King to a nearby store and dropped him off. At the time, nobody knew how significant that ride would become. Meanwhile, several nearby residents had witnessed pieces of the chaos unfold. One witness was an off-duty security officer relaxing at home when the sound of multiple gunshots shattered the morning calm. He rushed to his window and saw a scene straight out of a nightmare. One man was running down the middle of the street. Another was racing up a driveway. Most alarming of all, the man sprinting through the street appeared to be carrying a silver, semi-automatic handgun. Nearby, a third man lay motionless on the ground. Roughly 7 minutes later, sheriff's deputies arrived. From his window, the security officer watched one of the fleeing individuals walk over and begin speaking with law enforcement. Another witness, Monica Chavez, also heard the gunfire. Looking outside, she noticed a man moving quickly toward what she described as a yellowish four-door vehicle. As he approached the car, she saw him make a motion near his waistband that looked like he was concealing something. He climbed into the vehicle and it immediately drove away. When detectives later presented her with a photo lineup, Chavez selected 2 photographs. One of those photos belonged to Anthony King, whom she said strongly resembled the man she had seen leaving the area. Deputies responded with remarkable speed. arriving within roughly a minute of the 911 call. At the scene, investigators recovered shell casings that supported witness descriptions of a semi-automatic weapon being used. Detectives also interviewed Cooper, who remained adamant that he got a clear look at the shooter. He explained that nothing obstructed his view and insisted he saw both the gunman and the weapon. One detail especially stood out in his memory. The handgun was bright and chrome colored. As investigators worked the case, doctors fought to save Andrew Bender's life. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Detectives attempted to speak with him, hoping he might provide answers about what happened. Unfortunately, Bender never regained consciousness. For nearly 2 weeks, his loved ones held on to hope. Then, 13 days after the shooting, Andrew Bender passed away. He was only 9 days away from his 20th birthday. As investigators worked to piece together what happened on Cedar Street, one of the most important conversations took place just hours after the shooting. Later that same day, Cooper spoke with Andrew Bender's mother, Tiffany Moore. According to Moore's later testimony, Cooper didn't hesitate when talking about the gunman. He identified the shooter as a man known on the streets as AWOL. Wanting to make sure there was no misunderstanding, Moore showed Cooper a photograph of Anthony King. Cooper immediately confirmed that the man in the picture was the person who had pulled the trigger. While that conversation was happening, detectives were busy gathering physical evidence. One of their biggest breakthroughs came from home surveillance footage recorded on Cedar Street. The video provided investigators with a timeline that would later become a major part of the case. At 8:51 that morning, the camera captured 2 men walking down the street. Cornell Dunlap later identified them as the same 2 individuals who had approached him earlier and asked where he was from, Bender and Cooper. The footage also revealed another interesting detail. Parked directly behind Dunlap's gold Dodge Avenger was a white Chevy Traverse. Investigators later learned that the SUV belonged to members of Anthony King's wife's family. A few minutes later, at approximately 8:57 a.m., Dunlap could be seen getting into his Dodge Avenger and pulling over along the street. Then, at 8:58 a.m., the camera captured a person running through the frame. During later testimony, Dunlap identified that runner as Anthony King. As the investigation continued, detectives focused heavily on Cooper, who was one of the few surviving eyewitnesses. 2 months after the shooting, on March 22, 2016, investigators finally sat down with him for a formal interview. From the beginning, Cooper appeared reluctant. He told detectives he wanted no involvement in the case and even denied being a witness to the murder. But things got interesting when detectives conducted a photo lineup. One by one, Cooper was shown 6 photographs. When he reached the 3rd photo, King's picture, he reportedly laughed. After looking through all 6 images, he made a cryptic statement that investigators would later remember. Rather than directly naming anyone, he suggested removing photos 5 and 6 and letting detectives figure out the rest. 3 days later, the investigation took another major turn. On March 25th, detectives arrived at King's residence with a search warrant. King was present when officers showed up, and he was arrested on the spot. During the arrest, investigators recovered a cell phone from his pocket. When detectives questioned him, King denied being anywhere near the area where Bender had been shot. According to his account, he wasn't even close to the crime scene. However, the digital evidence told a different story. Cell phone records showed activity placing King's phone near the location of the shooting around the same time the murder occurred. That evidence immediately raised serious questions about his version of events. To be fair, King did have an alibi that offered some support for his defense. Records from his daughter's school showed that he had signed her in that morning at approximately 8:40 a.m. On the surface, that seemed helpful, but when defense investigators tested the route themselves, they discovered that the drive from the school to the crime scene took only about 8.5 minutes under normal weekday traffic conditions. The shooting happened around 8:57 a.m. That meant someone leaving the school at 8:40 would have had more than enough time to reach Cedar Street before the gunfire erupted. Then, investigators uncovered another piece of evidence that didn't help King's situation. On the very day he was arrested, King placed a recorded phone call from jail to his wife. During the conversation, she reassured him that she had possession of all his phones. But only 4 days later, her story changed dramatically. When speaking with the detective, she claimed that King's phone had been thrown into a fire pit and destroyed. The recorded jail calls only added more scrutiny. During one conversation, King reportedly expressed regret about keeping the phone for so long. He suggested that he should have gotten rid of it much earlier and indicated that doing so would have prevented many of the problems he was now facing. To prosecutors, those statements sounded less like frustration and more like consciousness of guilt. Eventually, prosecutors formally charged King with murder along with firearm enhancements. They also alleged that he had a prior serious felony conviction, which counted as a strike under California's 3 strikes law. King pleaded not guilty and prepared for trial. As the case moved toward court, Cooper once again became a key figure. In February 2017, a detective was transporting him to the courthouse when Cooper asked to stop for a cigarette break. During the stop, the detective showed him a collection of individual photographs of possible suspects. This time, Cooper pointed directly at King's photo and identified him as the killer. But when trial finally arrived, the story changed. Taking the witness stand, Cooper suddenly claimed he never actually saw the shooter at all. He testified that when he selected King's photograph during the identification process, he had essentially been guessing. According to Cooper, the selection wasn't based on certainty, but on chance. He also acknowledged speaking with Tiffany Moore after the shooting, but denied ever identifying the gunman to her. The jury ultimately had to decide which version of Cooper's story they believed: the statements he made shortly after the murder or the testimony he gave from the witness stand years later. In the end, they sided with the prosecution. Jurors found Anthony King guilty of first-degree murder and concluded that the firearm allegations were true. After the verdict, the case moved into a separate proceeding where a judge reviewed King's criminal history. The court determined that both the prior strike allegation and the prior serious felony allegation were valid. King's defense team later requested a new trial, but the judge denied the motion. That decision cleared the way for sentencing. When the court finally handed down its punishment, the sentence was enormous. King received 50 years to life for the murder conviction. Because of his prior strike, the standard 25 years to life sentence was doubled. The court then added another consecutive 25 years to life term for the firearm enhancement. Finally, an additional 5 years was imposed because of the prior serious felony conviction. When everything was added together, Anthony King was sentenced to 80 years to life in prison, effectively ensuring that the rest of his life would be spent behind bars. As the years passed and old alliances continued to crumble, the streets of Compton started looking very different from what they once had. One of the biggest changes came when the neighborhood Compton Crips formed an alliance that many people never thought they would see. After years of conflict and shifting loyalties, neighborhood aligned itself with the Santana Block Compton Crips, the very gang that had long been considered Southside's most bitter enemy. But while neighborhood and Santana were strengthening their relationship, neighborhood managed to maintain ties with Kelly Park as well. For years, the two gangs remained connected through family relationships, friendships, and shared history. But eventually, Even that relationship would face a test that ended in tragedy, and at the center of that story was someone connected to Andrew Gregory Lee Bender III. The chain of events unfolded around a man named Harold, who worked for Marlon Johnson Sr., better known in the neighborhood as Big Zip. Harold lived on Big Zip's property in a trailer situated directly behind the house. Big Zip's residence wasn't just a family home, it was a gathering place. Several relatives lived there, including his son, known as Little Zip, Little Zip's half-brother Marlo Johnson, and Big Zip's niece, Sharika Mister. The property also happened to sit directly in Kelly Park Crip territory, making it a location where gang politics were never far away. Then there was Andrew Gregory Lee Bender III, known to most people simply as Bender. At the time, Bender was around 50 years old and affiliated with the neighborhood Crips. He was also Little Zip's cousin, meaning family connections tied him to people on both sides of complicated street relationships. On December 5th, 2021, Bender drove to Harold's place to have some work done on his SUV. The two men knew each other, and the visit initially seemed routine. Around noon, they decided to leave the property and pick up parts needed for the vehicle. But before they could even make it out of the driveway, something happened that immediately changed the mood. A young man known to be affiliated with the Kelly Park Crips approached Bender's vehicle and confronted him about his father's death. Instead of denying any connection, Bender acknowledged that while he wasn't the person responsible, he had been present with the individuals involved. At the same time, he made it clear that those events belonged to the past and that he had no interest in revisiting old conflicts. The exchange was tense, but it ended without violence. Harold and Bender left, picked up the necessary parts, and eventually returned to the property. When they pulled back into the driveway, they noticed a Dodge Charger parked outside. The vehicle belonged to Lawrence Stackhouse. Harold had never personally met Stackhouse before, but he had heard plenty about him. According to people in the area, Stackhouse was considered an old-school Kelly Park Crip with a long-standing reputation in the neighborhood. At the same time, several Kelly Park members were gathered outside, talking and socializing around the property. At first, everything appeared calm. Harold noticed Stackhouse speaking with Sharika Mister near the driveway, while he and Bender headed toward the backyard. But before long, the atmosphere began to shift. At some point, Bender left the backyard and walked back to his SUV. When he returned, he was carrying a firearm down by his side. The weapon remained pointed toward the ground, but witnesses later described his demeanor as aggressive. As he walked past Stackhouse and Mister, he locked eyes with Stackhouse and stared him down in a way that immediately caught people's attention. Nobody had to say much. The tension was obvious. Sensing that things were beginning to escalate, Harold hurried inside to alert Big Zip that trouble might be brewing outside. By the time he returned, Sharika Mister was already telling people that Bender was acting out of character and causing problems. Harold then approached Stackhouse and warned him to stay alert. Moments later, Stackhouse reached into his waistband and pulled out a handgun. According to Harold, it appeared to be either a .40 caliber or .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Stackhouse placed the weapon on the hood of his vehicle and made it clear that he believed Bender had a problem with him. The mood around the property instantly became even more tense. Feeling disrespected and frustrated by the confrontation, Stackhouse eventually got into his vehicle and drove away. Meanwhile, Bender remained in the backyard, waiting for Harold to continue working on the SUV. The following morning started off like any other day, but before long, it would end in bloodshed. Around 8 a.m., Bender woke Harold up so they could continue working on the SUV. Harold slid underneath the vehicle and got to work while Bender stayed nearby, sitting on a stack of bricks and waiting for the repairs to be finished. For a short while, everything seemed normal. Then, around 8:15 a.m., police activity in the area caught Bender's attention. Whatever was happening nearby made him uneasy enough that he decided to get rid of the firearm he was carrying. Harold later recalled seeing Bender walk over to a plastic storage tub hidden beneath some clothes behind a truck parked in the driveway and stash the weapon there. About 15 minutes later, the atmosphere shifted again. Harold heard the unmistakable sound of a Dodge Charger approaching the house. Looking toward the street, he watched the vehicle drive past the property before making a sharp U-turn and coming back. The moment he saw the car, a bad feeling hit him. Harold sat up from beneath the SUV just as the Charger stopped in front of the driveway. Lawrence Stackhouse stepped out of the vehicle, and almost immediately Harold noticed something alarming. Stackhouse appeared to be armed. Bender noticed it too. The second he realized what was happening, he jumped up from the bricks and started running. But he never got the chance to escape. As soon as Bender stepped onto the driveway, gunfire erupted. A bullet struck him in the back, stopping him in his tracks. According to Harold's testimony, what happened next was even more disturbing. After being shot, Bender turned around and raised his hands. He wasn't holding a weapon and appeared completely defenseless, yet Stackhouse continued advancing toward him. Harold described watching Stackhouse close the distance until he was only a few feet away before firing several more rounds into Bender's chest and stomach. Bender reportedly continued backing away, stunned and unarmed as the shooting unfolded. The scene was so shocking that Harold instinctively yelled at Stackhouse, demanding to know what he was doing. Stackhouse's response struck Harold as less of an answer and more of a warning. Harold later testified that he immediately understood the message. In his mind, it was a clear signal to stay quiet about what he had just witnessed. Moments later, Stackhouse climbed back into his vehicle and sped away. As the dust settled, Marlo Johnson emerged from the house and rushed outside. Bender was gravely wounded and fighting for his life. According to testimony, he managed to tell Marlo to retrieve his gun and go after the shooter. Marlo grabbed the firearm and walked into the street, apparently intending to pursue Stackhouse himself. Fortunately, Harold intervened before things could spiral even further out of control. Instead, Harold grabbed his phone and called 911. During the initial moments of the call, he told the dispatcher that he had seen the shooter. But as the reality of the situation began sinking in, fear took over. Harold worried about being labeled a snitch and facing potential retaliation. As a result, he changed his story and told the dispatcher he hadn't actually gotten a good look at the gunman. By the time Deputy Kaluhiwa of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived, paramedics were already desperately trying to save Bender's life. He was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into emergency surgery. Despite doctors' efforts, the injuries were simply too severe. Bender died on the operating table. Later, the medical examiner would determine that 3 of the 4 gunshot wounds he suffered were independently fatal. The attack had left virtually no chance of survival. In the months that followed, investigators worked to build their case. Roughly 3 months after the shooting, Harold met with Sergeant Chow from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and reviewed a 6-photo lineup. This time, he identified Lawrence Stackhouse as the man who shot Bender. The investigation continued gaining momentum throughout 2022. In August of that year, law enforcement officers located Stackhouse at his mother's residence and placed him under arrest. Once they began searching for evidence, investigators uncovered several items that immediately caught their attention. Inside a vehicle Stackhouse had been driving on the day of his arrest, officers found a 9mm Luger handgun. The search didn't stop there. Later that same month, authorities executed a search warrant at his home. Inside, they discovered what prosecutors would later characterize as a tactical setup. Investigators recovered a bulletproof vest, a ski mask, and a 9mm semi-automatic handgun concealed inside the mask itself. Additional 9mm magazines were found hidden in both a closet and a black backpack. The evidence kept piling up. When detectives searched Stackhouse's Dodge Charger, they discovered paperwork showing he was in the process of transferring ownership of his home to his wife. More importantly, investigators extracted GPS data from the vehicle. That information proved significant. The GPS records showed the Charger in the South Los Angeles area, including the vicinity of Compton, during the exact morning of the murder. Vehicle data placed it there between approximately 7:59 a.m. and 8:26 a.m., directly overlapping with the timeline prosecutors were building. Detectives also examined the cell phone recovered during Stackhouse's arrest. According to investigators, the phone connected with two separate cell towers near the crime scene on both December 5th and December 6th, 2021, placing him in the area during the relevant time period. Detective Arthur Garcia later testified that Stackhouse wasn't merely associated with the Kelly Park Crips. In Garcia's opinion, he was an active member. To support that conclusion, Garcia pointed to text messages, interview statements, and recorded jail conversations connected to Stackhouse. Garcia also explained how gang culture often operates. According to his testimony, allowing perceived disrespect to go unanswered can seriously damage a gang member's reputation. Within that environment, failing to retaliate is often viewed as weakness and can affect someone's standing within the neighborhood. Then came a pair of jail calls that prosecutors believed were revealing. On August 31st, 2022, shortly after Harold testified during a preliminary hearing, Stackhouse called his wife from jail. During that conversation, he repeatedly discussed Harold's testimony and acknowledged that Harold had told the truth. According to investigators, Stackhouse even suggested he couldn't really blame him for taking the stand. A couple of months later, on October 27th, another recorded jail call surfaced. This time, Stackhouse was speaking with a friend. During the conversation, the friend referred to him as a Compton Crip. Notably, Stackhouse never challenged or denied the description. Despite all of that evidence, the defense entered trial with a very different version of events. Their case centered around an alibi. Stackhouse's mother and stepfather testified that there was no way he could have committed the murder because he was physically incapable of leaving his home. According to them, he had suffered a serious seizure the day before the shooting. Concerned about his condition, they drove to his residence that evening and stayed overnight to monitor him. The following morning, just after 8 a.m., his mother woke up to let an alarm company technician into the house. She testified that Stackhouse remained home throughout the entire visit. His stepfather supported that account, explaining that the technician arrived sometime between roughly 7:45 and 8:30 a.m. and remained there for several hours. Both parents described Stackhouse as being in rough shape that morning. They testified that while eating breakfast with his wife and son, he appeared weak, drifted in and out of consciousness, slouched over repeatedly, and even drooled at times. According to them, these symptoms continued for most of the day, and they never once saw him leave the residence. When prosecutors questioned why no one sought emergency medical care, his mother explained that because he had experienced seizures before, his wife knew how to care for him at home. To strengthen the alibi, the defense also called the alarm technician to testify. The technician stated that he arrived at the house at approximately 8:50 a.m. on December 6th and observed the family eating breakfast together. He agreed that Stackhouse appeared unwell and testified that he never saw him leave during the time he was working there. Even with that testimony, prosecutors moved forward aggressively. They charged Stackhouse with premeditated murder and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Prosecutors also alleged that he personally discharged the weapon during the killing. The case finally went before a jury in December 2022. After hearing weeks of testimony, reviewing witness statements, examining digital evidence, and weighing the competing stories, jurors ultimately rejected the defense's alibi. They found Lawrence Stackhouse guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. They also concluded that the firearm allegation was true. When sentencing day arrived, the judge handed down a punishment that ensured Stackhouse would spend decades behind bars. He received 25 years to life for the murder conviction, followed by a consecutive 4-year sentence tied to the firearm enhancement. An additional consecutive 2-year sentence was imposed for being a felon in possession of a firearm, bringing the case to its final chapter inside the courtroom.